Today I'm doing something a bit different. I'm doing a sit-down video rather than like a travel-y vlog or a talky-walky vlog because Talky Walkie, that's a good Air album actually. I wanted to give you some tips for applying for a PhD. A couple of little points before I get into it. This is not a video about whether you should do a PhD. That is like a really different question, and I think I'll make another video in the future about that, because just because you can do a PhD and you can get in and do well and everything doesn't mean that it's the right choice for you. So that's a different question, but putting that to one side, if you're sure that you want to do a PhD, in this video I'm just going to give you my advice about how I applied and how I made decisions and the things that I learned in that process. So I really hope that you find it useful or interesting, and don't forget to like, subscribe and share with anyone that you think will like it. I'm going to be talking about three main things in this video which I think were important in my application process. Firstly, about how to choose the right university, secondly, how to choose the right supervisor, and thirdly, tips on actually writing the application itself. I should also say, as a sort of disclaimer, this is about my experience applying for a media and communications department in the UK. So I think it can really only apply to arts and humanities and social sciences PhDs. So it could be, you know, it doesn't have to be media, but it could be anthropology or sociology or politics or anything like that. But it wouldn't really apply to maths or sciences, which have a different system. Or if you're applying to join a project that already exists as part of a research team. This video is about writing a proposal for your own research project that you've come up with yourself.
Let's go!
So I'm going to roll the first 2 points about choosing the right university and choosing the right supervisor into one, because I think that they're very connected. The process of choosing the right university for a PhD is quite different to the process when you're applying for a bachelor's or a master's degree. That's for the main reason that you're not applying for a taught course at PhD level. So when you're going for a bachelor's or a master's, you'll probably be thinking about what course you want to do specifically, and then also where you want to live, and you might be looking at the rankings of the universities and also at the grade requirements for the particular courses that you want to apply for. At PhD it's a bit different because you're not applying for a taught course, you're basically doing your own research. So you're coming up with the project, you're building it from scratch, you're coming up with the methods, the theory. So whilst it is still very important whether the university is good for your particular subject, that's not because they have good courses being taught, it's because they have the right people working at the institutions who can help you with your project in the form of a supervisor. That means that when you're looking for the right institution and the right supervisor for you, you are more interested in whether that university has expertise in your very specific area of interest. So that doesn't necessarily just mean that they have a good department for your subject, your whole discipline. Like, when I was looking at LSE, it did help that LSE is very good for media and communications, it's highly ranked, but really what I was looking for was that there were people in the department who could help me with my particular project, which is about YouTube and content creators. That doesn't mean that they have to study the very specific thing that you want to study. So there's no one at LSE who's specifically studying YouTube. But when I chose my supervisor, it was partly because I could see that from her research interests, she would be able to contribute to my project and help me, guide me through my project, because she had expertise in doing research online with youth, and at that time, I thought that my project was going to be specifically about young people, so it was an obvious choice for me because I knew that she would be able to help me with my project. The way I like to think about the PhD is that it's basically a collaboration between you and your supervisor. That's not to say that your supervisor is doing most of the work. Of course, you're doing most of the work, but your supervisor has a key role in steering the direction of your research. And if you have a clash of epistemologies or of approaches, that's going to be really difficult for you. If they disagree with you in terms of how you should go about doing your project, it's probably just going to cause you a lot of stress and it won't result in the best project possible. So when you're trying to decide what institution and what supervisor to go for, with a PhD, you're likely to be trying to balance between the reputation of the institution and the specific supervisor that you want, because it might be that there's a very good, highly ranked institution that you can get into, but there's no one at that institution who matches your project. And equally, it might be that there's a university that's less well regarded, but the perfect supervisor works there for you, the person who's the world expert in your particular area of interest. You probably get different advice from different people about this, and some people might disagree with me, but I would say, on balance, the supervisor is more important than the institution. That's because when you're doing a PhD, your supervisor is really your lifeline. They're the person that you're going to be talking to the most. They're going to be helping you with your project, steering you through the project. There's a lot of things that you won't have done before in terms of research, so they really are a really important person for you. If you have a bad relationship with your supervisor, I think that can be a huge reason for people dropping out of PhDs and just having a really bad time and having more stress than is necessary. Obviously, there are two parts to that. One is that the supervisor has research expertise in your field, which is really important. But secondly, it's just that you have a good rapport with that person. I think that people have different needs when it comes to a supervisor-supervisee relationship. Some people really want someone really supportive who is going to give them the emotional support they need and be gentle with them. And other people prefer to have someone who's really tough on them, really intellectually challenging, and isn't really a friend to you. So I think that you need to decide what you want and what you need. I think that I knew when I was applying that I wanted someone who was going to challenge me, of course, because that's what is going to create the best project possible. But I know that coming into the PhD, I felt quite insecure, so I wanted to have someone who would be supportive, and not that they wouldn't be critical, because of course that's like a core component of academic life, but the way in which they would be critical would be supportive. So that's important to me, but it might not be important to you, and it's just worth knowing where you're at with that. Obviously, it's hard to actually know what someone's going to be like before you've actually started at the institution, but I would recommend that you really take your time to talk to your potential supervisor, send them emails, give them a ring, go and meet them if possible, because just because someone is good in your area of research doesn't mean that you'll get on with them. And sometimes when someone is really at the top of their field, they're extra busy, for example, and they won't be able to give you the time that you need. So that's another consideration as well. Really, although they're interviewing you and judging you, you're also judging and vetting them, because it's a two-way street, and you're offering the institution something. You have a project that's hopefully interesting, and you deserve to have the right person for your project and to be at the right institution for you. In terms of applying, there are a few different ways that it can work. For me, what I did was I found the supervisor that I wanted first, and then I emailed her and I told her about my project, and I basically emailed her to see if she was interested in supervising me, and she said yes, luckily. And then from there I went on to write the application. I got some advice from her about writing the application, and I applied to LSE. Whereas I know that some people in my department applied through LSE centrally and then wrote on the form who they wanted their supervisor to be. So their first point of contact was LSE itself and not the supervisor. So it probably depends a bit on the institution, but I would recommend getting in touch with your potential supervisor first, because if they're not interested in your project and you get bounced to someone else in the department, it's probably not going to work. One other really important thing to look at before you apply for a PhD is the funding opportunities at the institution you're looking at. Most people try to get funding for their PhD because it's very difficult to do it without funding. You can do it part-time over 6 or 7 years and work, or you can do it full-time and work. There are people who do that, of course, but it is really difficult, so I wouldn't recommend it. What you want to do when you're looking at an institution is to see what scholarships are available and what the requirements are. Like, some scholarships have certain requirements or certain types of projects that they're looking to fund. You can always also ask your potential supervisor or institution about funding, and they'll give you advice about how to do that. Sometimes it involves a separate application as well. I had to do a different application for some funding, which I didn't get in the end, and then I ended up getting funding from a different organisation. I'm funded by the ESRC, which is the Economic and Social Research Council in the UK. The different funding bodies have different rules and different amounts that they give. So at LSE, I get £16,555 a year to live as a maintenance grant, and then they also pay my fees. For me, that's enough to live on because I have quite cheap rent, but a lot of people would struggle to live on that much in London. So that's something worth thinking about if you're thinking about London, or in other cities they give you even less because they think, you know, it costs less to live in other cities, so they give you, I don't know exactly what it is, but I think it's like 14,000 something a year, so you might have to work alongside anyway, even if you are funded. There's also the timing of your application is really important, particularly for funding, because most universities will have different rounds of funding decisions, so the earlier you apply, the better your chances are to get funding. They will have like an early application first round where they will probably choose some people to get the funding, and then if in that first round all the funding isn't used up, they'll have another round. Also, different types of funding have different dates, so basically the earlier the better. So now I'm going to go on to talking about the proposal, the actual application, writing the application itself. What I had to do for LSE was to write a 2,500 word proposal for my research project, and then also a personal statement that was 1,000 words, or no, 1,500 words, I think. And then I also had to send in like an example essay and a CV. But really the big thing there is the proposal. You also have to get two academic references for your PhD application, or at least I did at LSE. I assume that's the norm at lots of universities in the UK. So it's worth thinking about ahead of time, because that was something that kind of I got stuck on because I had to do my application really quickly. It meant that I had to ask the professors that I was getting my my references from to do it really fast, and I felt like that was a bit awkward. So it's really good to plan ahead and to know what you're going to need and to gather all the pieces well in advance of the deadline, so that you're not scraping it all together at the last minute like I did. I would say the main difference between like master's level and PhD level is that at master's level it's kind of enough to just basically do a good literature review in an essay and be a bit critical, so write about what other people have written. Whereas at PhD, you're really pushed to say something different to what other people have said, to give what they call it is an original contribution, although that's quite a problematic term, I would say, because what is originality? But the point is that you understand like what else has been written and that you have something new to offer. That could be a new methodology as well. It doesn't have to be some new theory of something. It could be like a new object of study or a fresh way of researching something that's been researched before for a good reason. You know, there has to be a good reason why you want to research it in a different way. I think what they're looking for is that you are you're competent and passionate about the subject that you're looking at. You obviously have the grades or the experience necessary to like keep up with the high demands of a PhD. When you're writing your research proposal, it doesn't have to be perfect. Mine definitely wasn't, and my project, even a year into my PhD, is very different to the project I wrote in my proposal. So one piece of advice I would give is don't worry too much about it being perfect. I think you just need to try and show who you are in your proposal, what kind of researcher you are, and what kind of person you are, and what you're passionate about. I think that that's what they want to see. It doesn't have to be a kind of airtight, you know, rock solid proposal. It just has to show them that you're able to do a PhD. For the research proposal, I followed there was like a template kind of that LSE offered. I'm sure there are different ones on different university websites, but it's probably quite standardised. So I had different subheadings, and what those were firstly an introduction where I talked about the general background for my project. In my case, that was about YouTube and the current state of affairs on YouTube as I saw it. So that introduction is just kind of, you're trying to say why it's an important topic, why it's interesting or why you're interested in it. And then secondly, a literature review of your topic of study. So what you're doing there is basically summarising what other people have written about it and demonstrating what gap you are filling in that literature, or why you think it's important for someone to research it further, because there's a lot of money and resources and time that go into a PhD, so you really need to prove that your project is an important thing to study. And as my supervisor is always saying to me, what's at stake? So what is at stake in your project? If someone didn't do your project, what would be missing from the world, I suppose, or why is it an important thing to study? That's always an important question to ask, because it might be that the answer is that it's not important. I don't think that it's a good enough answer just to say I'm interested in it, although that's really important. You need to say why other people should be interested in it, even if they're not to begin with. I find that studying YouTube, for example, I'm really passionate about YouTube and I just find it fascinating, but not everyone finds YouTube specifically very fascinating, so I need to convince them further that it's something worth studying and worth putting time into. That's really important. If you can talk about why your particular project is important and demonstrate that in your proposal, that will go a long way to convincing them that you're someone worth taking on. And then after the literature review, what did I do? Methodology. So I had it was a fairly brief section, but I had a section where I spoke about the methods that I wanted to use. When I was applying, I was proposing to do interviews and participant observation. Quite a lot of the same things I am doing, although they were in a different form and of a slightly different object of study. You want to show that you understand what methods you'll be using and how those fit with your kind of research questions, because certain methods are appropriate for certain types of approaches, certain types of epistemologies and approaches. And then after the methodology, I had a conclusion where I just said, I kind of just summed up why I thought it was an important topic to study, and then I had a little bit at the end which was about the supervisor, where I just said I've already spoken to my potential supervisor and she has agreed that this is worthy of study and has given me advice on the application. And then after all that, at the end I had a bibliography. It will probably depend on your particular project, but just as an example, for my particular proposal, which was 2,500 words, I had about 35 references in my bibliography, so quite a few. But then I didn't talk about all of those people in detail. It was mostly in the literature review section where I was just giving an overview, and then in brackets saying, giving various references of people who demonstrated that type of argument, for example. In the personal statement, I think you're trying to do three main things. So firstly, you're trying to demonstrate that you are able to do a PhD and that you have the right background academically to do a PhD in that discipline. Secondly, you're saying why you want to do a PhD at that particular institution. So you should talk about the specifics of that institution and why it's appealing to you. Beyond just your project, but also what else they do in that institution, some of their expertise, because those are the types of projects that you're going to get involved with beyond your project, your own PhD research. And thirdly, you're trying to say why you want to do a PhD at all, because it's not self-evident. I think it's only like 50% of people who do PhDs that go on to work in academia. Lots of people do PhDs and then go back to the private sector or go and work for NGOs or whatever. But I think that you should give an indication of why you have chosen to do a PhD. It looks good to be clear about your direction. Even if you're not that clear yourself about what your direction is, I think that just being clear about why you want to do it will give them confidence that you will stick with it and you're not just gonna flake out after a year because it's hard. One thing that I did that I would definitely recommend in a personal statement is to show specific knowledge of the institution that you're applying to. So for me, I only applied to LSE because I wanted the particular supervisor that I went for. Some people will apply to different universities, but even if you're doing lots of different applications, I would definitely recommend tailoring them to each university you're applying to. What I did in my personal statement was I talked about the different research projects that are going on in the department at LSE that I wanted to join. That's not my PhD research, this is additionally to my PhD project. I also talked about the other things academically that are going on in the department and showing that I had chosen LSE for a reason beyond the fact that it's highly ranked. I was choosing it because there were things happening in the department that I was interested in getting involved with academically. Because a PhD isn't just about the project that you're doing, there are lots of other things you're expected to do, including but not limited to teaching, writing journals, getting involved as a research assistant in projects, speaking at conferences, that kind of thing. So there's quite a lot beyond just doing your research project, and I think when they're choosing someone to join their institution, they want to see that you are someone who wants to get involved with those things and wants to play an active role in the department and really bring value to the department beyond your specific project. I think that that's something that will set you apart from other applicants, is that you've really looked into the university and you understand what they do and you want to be part of that. I think for the most part, institutions want to know that you actually want to be there and rather than somewhere else, and you're not just kind of using that university, you are going to be working there. Because a PhD is not like an undergraduate or a master's. Really, it's somewhere between being a student and working for an institution, so you are part of the research community of that university. So I hope you found this video useful. Please do ask questions below if you have any. I'd be really happy to answer any questions in the comments. I think that applying for a PhD is quite daunting because it feels like you have to have everything figured out and have a really rock solid proposal before you even start. But the reality is you just don't. You have to be able to show that you're going to be a good student, but you are still a student, you know. Yes, the level is much higher and they do expect a lot, but you don't have to already be at the end of the PhD, you know, they're not expecting you to have everything figured out. I really hope you like this. Please give it a like, press the bell icon if you want to get notifications every time I post a video, but I post a video every Friday. I hope you have a great week and see you next week. Bye!